Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Following months of insurmountable political deadlock, citizens of Kosovo are heading for a snap election on Sunday. But doubts remain that even this can help them break the stalemate. With longtime Prime Minister Albin Kurti likely to win the vote yet again, the nation braces for potential instability as the risk of the country drifting onwards with no government or approved budget continues to loom large. Joining us here today to help decode the electoral puzzle in Pristina is Toby Vogel, co-founder of the Democratization Policy Council. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
First of all, let us remind our viewers briefly, why is Kosovo holding elections yet again? The last time they did so was February. So what happened along the way?
That's right. So in February, then Prime Minister Albin Kurti and his veteran dossier self-determination party or movement won about 42% of the vote. And was unable to form a government on its own, obviously, because it did not have an absolute majority, but also it turned out to be unable to find a coalition partner. None of the opposition parties, none of the smaller parties of the ethnic parties, or not enough of them, wanted to join a government led by Kurti, who is a divisive figure in Kosovo. He is one of those polarizing figures that you either support or oppose. And so he had trouble putting together a coalition. And it is actually quite likely that a similar scenario might materialize in these elections, today's elections, as well. According to opinion polls, veteran dossier is polling at around 38 to 42 or so percent. So, a repeat of the same scenario is possible. But the expectation is that the opposition bloc could actually form a coalition against Kurti and achieve a parliamentary majority like that.
So what is the reason for Kurti's popularity? Given that he was essentially overseeing this time of chaos, all these months during which there was, first, there wasn't even a properly functioning parliament, right? Because they were not able to appoint a speaker. And later on, parliament began work, but was unable to give a vote of confidence to any sort of workable government to speak of. Wouldn't this normally have alerted people to the fact that he's not really able to procure a functioning configuration for governance, and therefore that they might want to look at other options?
Albin Kurti is one of those leaders, and I would argue he's probably the only major party leader like that in the entire region of the Western Balkans, who has a very strong ideological profile. He is let's call him a left-wing populist. And so to his supporters, they do not necessarily blame him for the stalemate. They blame the other parties that were unwilling to compromise with their own programs and join a Kurti-led government. So I don't think this has necessarily hurt him very much. What might hurt him is the state of the economy, which is not brilliant, in particular rising energy prices that are a problem and have been exploited, obviously, by the opposition. So it's bread and butter issues that might swing a few votes here and there. But generally speaking, the party landscape is quite polarized, and not huge blocks of voters are just sort of available to be picked up by, political entrepreneurs. So there is a risk of a repeat of the February 2025 scenario, but the figures might also just work out enough for the opposition to be able to come together and form a government that would not involve Kurti.
Speaking of which, let's take a look at the opposition. What can they offer, and what arguments could they advance against Kurti at this stage, apart from the state of the economy, which you've just mentioned? There has been talk that Kurti was unable to endear the country's allies to his rule, indeed that he might have alienated them. Would this argument hold water?
It's a little more nuanced than that, but there is no doubt that under Albin Kurti, the relationship with in particular Washington, but also Brussels, has deteriorated. There's no doubt about that. Kurti is a strong-willed personality that is not willing to just do the West's bidding. And so he is unlike previous leaders of Kosovo, which were much more aligned, if you will, with what the West wanted. And that is, above all, stability, not rocking the boat, engage in the dialogue with Serbia, be nice to the 5 EU member states that don't recognize Kosovo. They went along with that. Kurti has not. And so he is not a much liked figure abroad. But I would argue that regardless of what Kurti does or doesn't do, the West really has been fixated on Belgrade and on Serbia in its approach to the Western Balkans. And so whatever Kurti could or could not have done would probably have only made a big difference on the margins. So this is something that's being exploited by the opposition. They're saying he's leading us into isolation. The EU path is stalled. And while it is certainly true that the EU path is stalled, I don't think that a different government would have been able to lead to a different outcome here. Again, 5 EU member states don't recognize Kosovo. The EU does not want to antagonize Serbia, especially not right now with President Vučić under pressure domestically. And so I don't think that would necessarily have made a huge difference.
But what other options would you say that Albin Kurti has? Geopolitically, it sounds as a bit of a feat to be able to alienate both Washington and Brussels, given that they are a bit at loggerheads today over certain issues. Doesn't this risk the sort of, backsliding towards the east instead, which, given the precarious position and given that we already have if not Moscow-aligned, at least slightly Moscow-friendly authorities in Serbia, doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense for Pristina. So what is the calculation there on Mr. Kurti's part?
I think the deteriorating relationship between Pristina and Brussels, Washington, some of that, as I said before, is certainly due to Albin Kurti and his personality. I don't think there's a big strategy behind that. But a lot of it is to do with the West's posture vis-à-vis the region. And as I mentioned before, that posture is very much articulated around the red lines of President Vučić. So the West does not want to push Vučić too hard into recognizing Kosovo. The West understands that's impossible for him to do under present circumstances. And so all the pressure was brought to bear on Pristina. But with Albin Kurti, that sort of pressure just does not work. So, in terms of voters in Kosovo, we will see tonight what they will have decided. But I think there is a sense that we are being punished unfairly, and Kurti is being punished unfairly. And there might well be a certain sympathy vote for him in reaction to that. Some people feel bullied by the West, in effect.
What about the leaders of the opposition? You're saying that they're not quite as charismatic as Albin Kurti is. But do they really stand a chance of having, their narratives actually break through and reach a greater number of voters? Let's talk in particular about Bedri Hamza, because he seems to be the biggest rival to Mr. Kurti at the present stage.
Well, the biggest rival arguably would be Hashim Thaçi, who sits in a prison cell in The Hague, where he's been for a few years on trial for alleged war crimes during the conflict in 1998 and 99. He has been a dominant figure in Kosovo's in Kosovo's history as an independent country since 2008. And he's not running for obvious reasons. I think the opposition has improved its game since February, but as I said before, I think it's a very, very polarized electorate where you are either for or against Albin Kurti. So no matter how well the campaign has been led by some of the opposition parties, there is just a certain amount, a certain share of the voting population that is unlikely to vote for them. And so you have these two big blocks, the current opposition and Vetëvendosje, that are aligned against each other, with things moving a little bit on the margins, but just how much, we'll have to wait and see.
So now, not only are we running a risk of once again having a hung parliament, essentially, and no government again if the coalition talks following elections break down, also we have presidential elections in March. Do you think that this could further contribute to the possible chaos?
My sense from talking to people in Kosovo is actually that this will focus minds post-election. In other words, the party leaders understand that their voters would not forgive them if they produced the same replica of what happened after the February elections. So I think, the opposition understands that it either has to find the numbers to form an opposition-led government, or some of the opposition parties have to compromise on their programs, on their platforms, and go into coalition with Kurti. Those are the two essential options. A third option might be for Kurti to say, and he's already sort of hinted at that, he might step down and let somebody else lead the government that is primarily dominated by Vetëvendosje. But at the end of the day, everyone knows that Vetëvendosje is Albin Kurti. So, whether or not he's prime minister is maybe not such a big factor in the coalition talks. But politicians, I think, in Kosovo are well aware of the responsibility that is now on their shoulders.
Toby Vogel was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you so much.
And I'm Jonasz. Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news, updates and commentary.